Okay, so Killing Floor 3 has been delayed, and that's probably the best thing that could have happened for the game after its exceptionally poorly received beta. Of course, the whole point of a beta, alpha, or any form of pre-launch playtesting session, whether it be public or private, is to gather feedback and allow members of the community to engage with snippets of a game's content before it's fully released. Sadly, there's been a recent trend of betas taking place so close to a game's launch that they can only really serve as a marketing device and essentially a glorified demo. Any genuine constructive criticism that comes from a beta that takes place shortly before launch can at best be expected to be addressed a few months after release, or at worst result in rushed last-minute changes before day one. But it seems like Tripwire are trying to avoid this by delaying the game, allowing themselves to take the necessary time to go back to the drawing board now that the community have made themselves heard and properly address the feedback. They've openly stated that Killing Floor 3 missed the mark, and have told us some of the things they're going to be looking at, like performance and stability, the visual elements of the game, and the way weapons feel. We'll be taking a look at some of the improvements we've already got a glimpse of a little later. Most importantly, I think they've also confirmed that you'll be able to select your perk class and playable character independently from each other at some point after the game's launch. The uproar around this controversial specialist system has been going on since long before this beta, and is actually the first piece of Killing Floor 3 news that I ever heard about, which leads me quite nicely onto why I'm making this video and talking about Killing Floor 3 to begin with. I'm a very new player to the Killing Floor series. I've known about the franchise for years. When you're as big a fan of wave-based zombie survival games like Call of Duty Zombies as I am, it's hard to not be familiar with Killing Floor, and I've been planning on using Killing Floor 3 as an entry point to the series since I learned that it was in development a few months back. I wasn't engaged enough with the community to have noticed that the beta was actually happening, so wasn't able to take part in it myself. The Killing Floor 3 gameplay you've been watching in this video was very kindly provided to me by the Rusty Chains. I'll leave a link to their review of the beta in the description, so thank you John for letting me steal this footage from you. I only really found out that the beta had taken place when I started to see a whole bunch of videos being recommended to me from fans of the Killing Floor series that felt let down by the beta's many shortcomings. Among the videos that I saw, there was this constant repetition of one major comparison, that being that Killing Floor 3 is going to fail and be dead on arrival, just like Payday 3. But actually, as somebody who was there for Payday 3's launch and the beta that preceded it, I understand that comparison, though I think it's so much further from the truth than you might actually believe. On one hand, you have Killing Floor 3's beta, which, as we established, was riddled with issues. From technical things like the game's performance to system-based controversy such as the specialist system. Further to that, many said that the weapons didn't feel quite right, and that the overall Killing Floor aesthetic and tone was somewhat lost. On the other hand, Payday 3's beta was actually quite well received. It can be hard to remember, but up until everything around the game's launch went down the way it did, the sentiment around Payday 3 for the most part was pretty damn positive. Most of Payday 3's biggest issues stemmed from problems that the player would only encounter after around 20 to 30 hours of gameplay. On top of that, some of those shortcomings simply weren't able to be experienced in the beta. The single heist we had access to is one of the game's best. The servers, while not perfect, were definitely much more reliable than they were when the game launched due to the limited number of beta participants. When it came to progression, it was capped at level 21, which most players could achieve with relative ease, so there was very little concern around the challenge-based progression system. We also hadn't had much time to truly explore the skill system, so a combination like ammo funnel and replenish was seen more as a novel way to specialize your playstyle instead of the somewhat broken mechanic that those skills are viewed as by some people today. And of course, most importantly, there were no bloody circles. So walking away from the Payday 3 beta, most of the community was impressed, or at the very least satisfied with the state of the game, and the excitement for launch continued to build up until the pre-order early access period begun, where some of the game's issues began to reveal themselves, and then once we found ourselves at the full release, well, we all know how that went. All of this is to say that Payday 3 was allowed to launch in the state that it did because there hadn't actually been an opportunity to give feedback on the game's biggest issues. I think it's very clear to see that Payday 3's beta fundamentally failed at being a beta in almost every sense of what a beta should be. It succeeded at being a marketing tool. We were certainly able to play the game and a lot of content was generated from it. I mean, I had a single YouTube short that did the best part of 80,000 views, and at the time I had just over 100 subscribers. Which feels like a good time to mention that if you are enjoying this video, consider clicking that subscribe button. We've currently got the goal of reaching 5,000 subscribers, and I'm racing another content creator, PD Lucky, to that milestone. Also, to sweeten the deal, if 100 people subscribe on this video alone, I will live stream my first time playing the original Killing Floor. I've played 2 for a little bit, but never touched the first one. But anyway, back to it. Why did Payday 3's beta fail at being a beta? Well, it generated publicity, as we said, but it didn't let us engage with the areas of the game that clearly required feedback the most. But also, by limiting the amount of players who could get early access, completely failed to stress test the servers, which led to one of the biggest controversy surrounding the full release. Which, if you're unfamiliar with what happened to Payday 3 at launch, the game didn't work for a while. And I mean, at all. For the first 3 days, you genuinely couldn't get past the loading screen. And if you did, then I also hope you bought a lottery ticket that day. If the community actually had the opportunity to develop their frustrations with certain systems and understand the game's flaws during this beta testing window, then we could have expressed each and every one of our concerns to the developers before we ever reached a situation as catastrophic as launch. If they were armed with all of our feedback on the issues that the game launched with, I think it's very likely that Starbreeze would have delayed Payday 3's release. If you look at the massive gap in communication and content additions the game saw during its first year, while the team were focused on improvements, I think it's really clear to see that if they had a crystal ball, the game could have been delayed, and that crystal ball really could have come in the form of a well-executed beta. With all of that in mind, I don't see how there exists a comparison between Killing Floor 3 and Payday 3 right now, even before the game was delayed. Killing Floor 3's beta has quite evidently succeeded where Payday 3's failed, and Tripwire are reacting in exactly the way I would have loved to have seen Starbreeze react if they were given the opportunity. I think it's much more acceptable for a beta to be poorly received than the full release of a game. A disappointing beta isn't indicative of a doomed launch, in the same way that a good beta doesn't guarantee success. Tripwire are seemingly already making pretty good progress when it comes to fixing Killing Floor 3. They've already confirmed that the specialist system is being addressed post-launch, which we'll talk about in a moment, but hopefully they're going to take a more show don't tell approach to keeping the community up to date with the improvements they're making. Within 1 week of announcing the game's delay, Tripwire have already released concept art for a city streets rework. This new art direction is a night and day comparison to what we saw in the beta. Just take a look at it compared to the gameplay you're seeing on screen as well. The reception to this concept art has been generally really positive. Of course, this hasn't got everyone excited. We live in a world where first impressions are extremely important, and even if Killing Floor 3 releases as the best game in the series after some more time in the oven, there will be individuals that refuse to give it a fair chance simply because the beta wasn't up to scratch. But most of the responses I've seen to this have been overwhelmingly positive and supportive of the developers, which is something I always love to see. I'm not saying that 4 pieces of concept art being released means that Killing Floor 3 is saved, but I want to praise this, as if the team continues to share what they're working on with us so transparently, it opens up a platform for the community to give continued feedback on the changes being made. Tripwire wants to make sure that they're on the right path, and there's no better way of doing that than by giving us an opportunity to tell them if they're heading in the wrong direction. I'm interested to see what core issues are addressed before the game's release and what is left to be adjusted post-launch, as the specialist system, which I understand to be one of the most controversial changes made so far, is something that is going to be addressed once the game is already out. I'm going to be honest, I am concerned that players who have seen the reaction to the beta and then return for the full release will conclude that if one of the biggest issues hasn't been addressed yet, then not much has changed. I think it's a big risk that I'm not sure why Tripwire are taking. From my perspective, it seems like all they have to do is divorce the ability and skill system from the cosmetic character that you choose. That seems like a somewhat straightforward thing to do, but that said, I am not a game developer. This video isn't about me criticizing or praising the Killing Floor 3 beta. After all, I wasn't able to play it, and on top of that, I'm quite new to the series, so it would be disingenuous of me to comment on the game itself. What I wanted to get across in this video is the difference between the situation Payday 3 found itself in after its beta compared to Killing Floor 3. It's very easy to say that both games are in the same boat because they received some very negative attention, but by drawing the distinction between Payday 3's catastrophic launch and Killing Floor 3's catastrophic beta, Killing Floor 3 actually has a fantastic opportunity to turn the ship around and really find success where Payday 3 couldn't. I hope that the biggest comparison we get to draw at the end of the day between Killing Floor 3 and Payday 3 is just how different the community sentiment is from the beta compared to launch. I want Killing Floor 3 to do a complete 180 in the same way that Payday 3 unfortunately did, but of course, only time will tell. I'm absolutely fascinated by the position Killing Floor 3 is currently in, and I'm eager to see what Tripwire does next in the time between now and the game's full launch. I'm going to be here covering Killing Floor 3's progress until the game is fully released. Just before we wrap things up though, there is one very important thing that I wanted to make abundantly clear. Your opinion is valid. Whether you hated the Killing Floor 3 beta or enjoyed it, whether you loved the Payday 3 beta or despised it, you're entitled to your own opinion, and I'm not here to challenge that in any way. When I say the Killing Floor 3 beta was hated and the Payday 3 beta wasn't, I'm talking about the general community sentiment that I was able to see. If you're interested in more Killing Floor content, firstly, let me know in the comments section down below, but if you want to hear more about the Killing Floor 3 beta from somebody who actually got a chance to play it, you can click the video on screen now to watch the Rusty Chains review of the Killing Floor 3 beta. Thanks again to John for letting me use your footage, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.